When a proud planter's daughter says, "I'd never date a slave," a stableman's quiet gaze changes everything. Courthouse steps blaze white in the noon heat, while the auctioneer's bell swings lazy overhead. She speaks the words that shame her own heart, but when the stableman looks up from gentling a skittish mare, something melts that she cannot take back. Thunder rolls across flooded creek beds. A child with perfect memory traces forbidden roots in kitchen flour. Lanterns burn at midnight, while dogs bay in the distance. But hidden in the family Bible's yellowed margins lies grandfather's secret, a promise written small that could rewrite every ledger in the county. Forge papers crackle, wax seals gleam wrong in candlelight. When the storm breaks and the truth comes flooding out, will a little girl's flawless recall be enough to save them all, or will the overseer's schemes drag them under before dawn? The auctioneer's bell swung lazy in the noon heat, brass catching courthouse light like a caught breath. Eliza Halcombe fanned herself beneath the portico's shade, her cream silk rustling against stone steps still warm from morning sun. The ribbons at the clerk's desk fluttered red and gold, marking deeds and debts in the ledger that never seemed to close. "Look there," Burke Whitfield murmured at her elbow, his tobacco breath stirring the lace at her collar. "That stableman's got himself a fine mare to gentle. Wonder what he whispers to make them settle so quick." Eliza's gaze drifted to the hitching post where a bay mare tossed her head, eyes rolling white. The stableman, Jonah, she'd heard him called, stood patient at the animal's shoulder. His hands moved slow and sure, palm flat against the horse's neck. No rope, no harsh words. Just his voice, low as creek water, and the mare's breathing eased to match his rhythm. The gossip circle tightened around her. "Missus." Carver leaned close, her stays creaking. "Shame about the Halcombe finances. Folks say your daddy owes the bank more than the harvest can cover." Heat flushed Eliza's cheeks. Burke's smirk widened as he pressed his advantage. "Maybe Miss Eliza needs a husband with deeper pockets. Course, she's got particular tastes, ain't that right, darling? Tell them what you told me about your standards." The crowd waited, faces eager for scandal. Eliza's fan snapped shut. The words came sharp and foolish. "I'd never date a slave." The silence that followed felt heavy as wet wool. Then Jonah looked up. His gaze found hers across the dusty square, steady, unafraid, holding something she'd never seen in any man's eyes. Not hunger or calculation, but a quiet dignity that made her courthouse words sound thin as paper in her own ears. She felt herself melting. The cruel certainty in her voice turned to ash on her tongue. At the edge of her vision, a small figure in a faded blue dress watched from beside the clerk's table. A child, maybe 10 years old, with a scrap of blue ribbon tied at her wrist. The girl's dark eyes moved from Eliza to Jonah, then back, as if reading the weight of words in the air between them. The murmur started low and spread like smoke. Burke chuckled, but the sound held an edge. "Well now, that's plain enough, ain't it? Miss Eliza knows her place." But she couldn't look away from Jonah's face. Shame and something else, something new and bright and terrible, bloomed in her chest like a flower, forcing its way through winter ground. Jonah's palm on the mare's neck stayed steady as a metronome, while Eliza's fan trembled shut. By sundown, the fever took the master hard, and the doctor's back room swallowed them all. Dr. Keene's office smelled of carbolic acid and bitter herbs. Glass jars lined the shelves like captured moonlight, each one holding some remedy Eliza couldn't pronounce. Her father lay on the narrow cot, breathing quick and shallow, his face flushed red as autumn leaves. "Temperature's climbing, Doctor," Keene muttered, pressing a porcelain saucer to her father's chest and listening close. The makeshift stethoscope made his breathing sound hollow, like wind through a broken window. "Needs cooling, but carefully. Too fast, and we'll shock his heart." Ruth, the housemaid, wrung her hands by the door. "I fetched cold water like you asked, Doctor." "Should I—" "Wait." Jonah stepped forward from where he'd been standing, quiet in the corner. "May I, Doctor?" Keene looked up, surprised. "You have experience with fever?" "Some." Jonah moved to the cot's edge. "Learned from a midwife down in Charleston. Pattern breathing can slow the heart, ease the lungs." Eliza watched as he placed one hand on her father's chest, the other on his own. His breathing grew deep and measured, a rhythm like distant thunder. "Match me," he said softly. "In through the nose, hold 3, out through the mouth. The child Mira, she'd heard someone call her, stepped closer. Her humming started low, barely more than a whisper. A lullaby, old as memory, matching Jonah's breathing pattern, note for note. The melody rose and fell like water over stones. "Lord," Ruth breathed, "look at him." The flush was fading from her father's cheeks. His breathing slowed, deepened, following the rhythm Jonah set and Mira's hymn carried. The fever's grip seemed to loosen with each measured breath. Eliza found herself moving without thought, fetching fresh water, wringing out cool cloths. Her hands worked steady while her mind reeled. This man she'd dismissed so cruelly knew things her expensive tutors never taught. And this child, with her blue ribbon and perfect pitch, could calm what medicine couldn't touch. "How did you know?" she whispered to Jonah as her father's breathing evened. "Bodies want to heal," he said simply. "Sometimes they just need reminded of the rhythm." The lullaby continued, soft as summer rain. Dr. Keene set down his porcelain dish and reached for herb, packets with hands that shook just slightly. "I'll prepare a tonic. But this," he gestured toward the peaceful face on the pillow, "this is the better medicine." Steam rose from bitter herb water as Mira's hum sank the room to quiet. That same hum followed them into the kitchen at daybreak. The plantation kitchen held the last cool air of night, though the banked fire promised another scorching day. Aunt Liddy bent over her biscuit dough, flour dusting her dark arms up to the elbows. The morning light through the window caught the blue ribbon at Mira's wrist as she helped sort beans at the scarred wooden table. "That song you hummed last night?" Eliza said, settling into the chair across from the child. "I've never heard it before." Mira's fingers paused over the beans. "Preacher Josiah taught it to me. Says it's old, from before he was born." Jonah entered carrying a bucket of fresh water, his boots silent on the kitchen stones. He'd been tending the horses since first light, but his clothes held no smell of sweat, only hay and leather, and something clean as pine soap. "Low River, carry me quiet," he said, recognizing the tune. "My grandmother sang it. Never knew all the words, though. I remember them," Mira said softly. She began to hum again, then added words in a voice clear as creek water. "Asterisk, Low River, carry me quiet, down past the bend where willows grow to the sawmill wheel that's standing, where the Quaker folks will know." Asterisk. Eliza frowned. "That's not a lullaby. That's directions." Mira's dark eyes lifted, bright with something that might have been pride. "Each verse points somewhere. The bend means Horseshoe Creek, the sawmills at Fenton's farm, and the Quaker folks." She traced a line through the flour that had scattered on the table. "That's Mrs. Naylor's place. She keeps a lantern on the left rail of her porch every Tuesday night." Jonah set down the water bucket with care. "Tuesday's tomorrow. Lantern on the left rail," Mira whispered, her finger marking a small dot in the flour. "Safe harbor for anybody needs it." The kitchen fell quiet except for Aunt Liddy's wooden spoon against the bowl. Even she had stopped her stirring to listen. "How do you know all this?" Eliza asked. "Songs remember things," Mira said, "even when folks forget they're remembering." The moment she said lantern, Pike's boot scraped the sill. The overseer filled the kitchen doorway like a storm cloud, his pale eyes moving from face to face before settling on the flour-marked table. Pike had been her father's hireling for 3 years now, brought up from Georgia when the last overseer ran off with a field hand's wife. He carried himself with the swagger of a man who knew his worth was measured in other people's fear. "Morning, Miss Eliza." His voice held the honey that meant trouble. "Checking on the help, are we?" Mira's hand moved quick as a bird, smoothing the flour. Clean, but Pike had seen enough. "Interesting conversation for a kitchen," his gaze fixed on Jonah. "You been teaching geography to the children?" "Teaching, breathing," Jonah said quietly, "to help with the master's fever." "Breathing." Pike's smile showed too many teeth. "That what you call it? And this singing child, she's part of your breathing lessons?" Eliza stood, silk skirts rustling her authority. "Mr. Pike, I don't see how the servants' conversations concern—" "Oh, they concern me plenty." Pike stepped closer, his boots loud on the stone floor. "See, Miss Eliza, your daddy's taken sick at a mighty inconvenient time. Bank's calling in debts next week. Bills need paying, and the harvest ain't near ready." He pulled a leather ledger from his coat, letting it fall open to pages covered with careful script. Got some suggestions for liquidating assets, starting with the most troublesome. Jonah didn't move, but something tightened in the air around him. You threatening my father's people? Eliza asked. Threatening? Pike's laugh held no humor. I'm talking business. This one here. He nodded toward Jonah. Worth $800 in Charleston, $9 if he's in good condition. That's a nice dent in your daddy's debt. And if I refuse? Pike's fingers drummed against the ledger's cover. Well, there's other ways to handle troublesome property. Runaway slave, caught planning escape routes. Might not make it to market at all. The kitchen went dead still. Even Aunt Liddy's spoon had stopped moving. Course, Pike continued, if the master don't recover, well, these decisions won't be yours to make, will they? Debt's got priority over sentiment. He snapped the ledger shut and tipped his hat to Eliza. Y'all have a blessed day now. And remember, conversations travel faster than horses in this county. The door slammed behind him, leaving silence thick as molasses. Eliza sank back into her chair, hands shaking. He can't. Father would never. Your father's dying, Jonah said gently. And dying men don't write bills of sale. Mira's small hand crept across the table to touch Eliza's fingers. The song remembers, she whispered. When folks forget, the song remembers. Outside, Pike's boots crunched across the gravel yard, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolled the hour like a countdown. Aunt Liddy's wooden spoon began its rhythm again, steady as a heartbeat, while the scent of biscuits rose golden from the warming oven. The fever broke on the third night, leaving her father weak as watered milk but breathing clear. Dr. Keene packed his black bag with hands that trembled only slightly. The worst crisis passed. But Pike's ledger remained on the kitchen table like a serpent coiled in sunshine, its threat no less real for being temporarily delayed. Eliza found herself walking the night passages of the house, her bare feet silent on carpet worn, thin by generations of Halcombe women. Sleep came in snatches, broken by her father's coughing and the sound of Pike's boots on the gallery, counting assets like a vulture pricing bones. It was past midnight when she heard the humming. The melody drifted soft as spider silk from the direction of the kitchen. Not Aunt Liddy, the cook's snoring shook the servant quarters like distant thunder. This was Mira's voice, threading through the darkness with the hymn that had calmed her father's fever. Eliza pulled her wrapper close and followed the sound. The kitchen fire had been banked to glowing coals, casting red shadows on the walls. Mira sat at the table with a piece of brown paper spread before her, marking lines with a nub of charcoal. Jonah stood by the window, watching the night. Can't sleep either? Eliza asked softly. Mira looked up, the blue ribbon at her wrist catching firelight. Working on the verses, making sure I got them right. On the paper, a rough map took shape. Creek bends and mill wheels, roads marked with tiny X's, and a careful drawing of a house with a porch. Mrs. Naylor's place? Eliza asked. Last Tuesday the lantern was left rail, Mira said. Night before that, it was right. Preacher Josiah says the signal changes. Jonah turned from the window. Someone's teaching railroad signs to the children. Railroad? Eliza frowned. There's no railroad through here. Different kind of railroad, Jonah said quietly. The kind that runs at night, with lanterns for signals and hymns for guideposts. Understanding hit like cold water, the Underground Railroad. Here, in her own county, threaded through creek beds and Quaker porches, and encoded in lullabies sung by children. How long have you known? She asked. Suspected since she sang for your father, Jonah said. But knowing and proving are different things. Mira's charcoal scratched another line. Pike's watching the roads now. Morning and night patrols, extra dogs. But he don't know about the mill wheel route. You're planning to run, Eliza said. It wasn't a question. Planning to be ready, Jonah corrected. Pike won't wait for your father to die natural. Soon as he figures the law's on his side, he'll move fast. Eliza sank into the chair beside Mira. The map seemed to pulse in the firelight, pathways to freedom drawn in charcoal and hope. There has to be another way. Maybe, Jonah said. But hope don't stop auction blocks. Mira looked up from her paper. Could stop forgeries, though. Both adults stared at her. Pike's ledger, she said. Something's wrong with the writing. The seal on that travel pass he showed yesterday, grape cluster, was upside down, and the ink's too blue. Clark uses brown ink for official papers. Eliza leaned closer. How do you know what the clerk uses? Watch everything, Mira said simply. Remember everything. That's how songs keep safe. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. All three froze, listening. Heavy footsteps, moving slow Pike, making his rounds. Mira folded the map quick and slipped it inside her dress. The charcoal vanished into a crack between table boards. When Pike's shadow darkened the kitchen doorway, they sat, innocent as morning prayer. Late for young ladies to be wandering, he said, eyes moving from face to face. Father needed water, Eliza said. I was heating some for his tonic. Thoughtful. Pike's gaze lingered on the table where charcoal dust still smudged the wood. And, you too? Night kitchen's an odd place for servants. Helping Miss Eliza, Jonah said. Heavy bucket for a lady to carry. Helpful. The word dripped, suspicion. Pike moved closer, his boots loud on stone. Y'all seem mighty, cooperative these days. Eliza stood, drawing her wrapper tighter. If you'll excuse me, I should return to Father. She turned toward the door, but Pike's voice stopped her. Miss Eliza, that courthouse conversation yesterday, you still stand by those words? About your standards and such? The kitchen held its breath. Jonah's face revealed nothing, but she caught the small tension in his shoulders. I said what I said, she replied carefully. Good. Hate to think grief was muddling your judgment. Pike touched his hat brim. Sleep well now. Tomorrow's likely to be a busy day. He left with the same measured tread, counting steps like coins. Eliza waited until his footsteps faded before sinking back into her chair. Forgeries? She whispered. If Mira's right, then we've got leverage, Jonah finished. Question is whether we're clever enough to use it. The coals shifted in the fireplace, sending sparks up the chimney like prayers seeking heaven. Outside, a night bird called once and fell silent. Mira's small hand crept toward Eliza's. Song's not finished yet, she whispered. Got more verses to learn. Dawn came grey and heavy, pregnant with the storm that had been threatening all week. Eliza woke to her father's coughing and the sound of rain tapping against window glass like impatient fingers. The fever was gone, but he remained weak as a newborn colt, propped against pillows that seemed to swallow his shrinking frame. Bankman's coming today, he wheezed when she brought him breakfast. Pike says debts won't wait for my health. Rest, Father. I'll handle the bank. His hand found hers, fingers thin as parchment. You're a good girl, Eliza. But business is business. And Pike's got legal standing if I can't manage affairs. The words hit like stones in still water. If her father couldn't handle the plantation's business, Pike could petition the court for temporary authority. That would make him master in all but name free to sell whomever he chose, whenever he chose. She found Jonah in the stable, brushing down the bay mare with long, gentle strokes. Rain drummed on the roof, overhead, turning the packed earth to mud outside the doors. Father's worse this morning, she said, without preamble. Jonah's hands never stopped moving. Expected. Fever takes its toll, even broken. Pike has legal papers. If Father's declared incompetent, we'll be gone before that happens. Eliza stepped closer, breathing the stable's familiar scent of hay and leather, and something indefinable that always clung to Jonah, not quite soap, not quite pine, but clean and honest as rainfall. What if there was another way? Been thinking on that. He set down the brush and turned to face her. Mira's map, her memory for details if we could prove Pike's been forging documents. The clerk would have to investigate. That would take time. Time enough, maybe. Jonah moved to the mare's head, stroking the white blaze between her eyes. But it's dangerous. Pike finds out we're onto him. He could disappear us before any investigation starts. Thunder rolled overhead, closer now. The mare's ears twitched, but she stayed calm under Jonah's touch. Tell me about the forgeries, Eliza said. Mira notices things. The seal, the ink color, the paperweight. Said Pike's been carrying documents that don't match the clerk's usual work. Could she testify to that? Jonah's smile held no humor. A slave child's word against a white overseer? In front of a white judge? The truth of it hit her like a slap. Of course, even if Mira was right about every detail, her testimony would count for nothing in a court of law. Then what good is knowing? Knowledge is power, Jonah said quietly. Question is how to use it without getting ourselves killed. A new voice called from the stable doorway. Maybe I can help with that. They turned to see Mrs. Naylor approaching, her grey hair dark with rain and her Quaker dress mud-splattered from the road. She carried herself with the quiet authority of a woman who'd faced down sheriffs and slave-catchers without flinching. Heard there was trouble brewing at the Halcombe place, she said, shaking water from her shawl. Thought I'd stop by and see if anyone needed assistance. Eliza glanced at Jonah, then back to the older woman. What kind of assistance? Mrs. Naylor's eyes held depths like still water, the kind that comes with lanterns and safe harbors, the kind that remembers when young girls sing old songs with perfect memory. She knew. Of course she knew. The Quaker woman with the signal lantern and the house marked on Mira's map. Pike's watching the roads, Eliza said carefully. Pike's watching the obvious roads. Mrs. Naylor moved into the stable, her presence somehow making the space feel safer. But there are older paths. Creek beds and mill races, places where wagons can travel quiet when they need to. And if we're caught, then we face the consequences. But standing still's not safety either, not when the devil's making his own plans. Thunder cracked overhead, and the rain intensified to a steady drumming. In the distance, church bells tolled the hour through the storm. Jonah's hand found the mare's neck, steadying her against the thunder. What do you propose, Mrs. Naylor's smile was small but steel-bright. Truth has its own power. Even when it can't speak in courtrooms, it can speak in other places, other ways. She pulled a folded paper from beneath her shawl, clean, white, bearing an official-looking seal. Clark's been missing some documents lately, lost in the flood last spring, or so he thinks, but I've got friends who remember what those papers said. Word for word. Eliza stared at the document. What does it say? That's for the reading. But it might interest you to know your grandfather was more generous in his will than anyone realized, especially regarding certain provisions for faithful service. The stable fell silent, except for rain on the roof and the soft sound of the mare's breathing. Somewhere in that silence, hope flickered like a candle in a hurricane. The song remembers, Mira said softly from the doorway, her blue ribbon bright against the grey morning. Even when folks forget they're remembering, Mrs. Naylor nodded. Especially then. The bankman arrived at noon, his black carriage splashing through puddles that reflected the slate-grey sky. Sutter was his name, a thin fellow with calculating eyes and hands that moved like a banker's, always figuring sums, always weighing profit against loss. Pike met him at the front door with the ledger tucked under his arm and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. From her father's bedroom window, Eliza watched them cross the gallery and disappear into the parlor where business was conducted and fates decided. Can't make out their words, she murmured to her father, who lay propped against his pillows like a scarecrow in Sunday clothes. Don't need to, he wheezed. Sutter's here for one thing, his money. Pike's here to give it to him, one way or another. The murmur of voices rose and fell below, punctuated by the scratch of pen on paper and the occasional thump of the ledger being opened and closed. Rain continued, its steady drumming on the roof, turning the world beyond the windows soft and grey. A soft knock at the door interrupted her watching. Mira slipped in, carrying a tea tray with hands that barely shook. Thought you might want something warm, she said, setting the tray on the bedside table. Eliza poured tea with care, grateful for the ordinary task. They're deciding our future down there. Maybe, Mira said. She pulled the blue ribbon from her wrist and began worrying it between her fingers. Or maybe they're deciding theirs. What do you mean? Instead of answering, Mira moved to the window. See that carriage? Look at the wheels. Eliza looked. The carriage sat elegant and black in the muddy yard, its brass fittings gleaming despite the rain. The wheels. They're clean, Eliza said, surprised. Too clean for a 3-mile ride from town in this mud. Mira's voice held the certainty of a child who noticed everything. And look at the horses. Been standing quiet, no steam from their breath. They ain't been driven hard. Understanding flickered. They've been here already. Recently. Yesterday, maybe. Or this morning early. Mira tied the ribbon back around her wrist. Planning meeting. Today's just for show. The voices below grew louder. Pike's laughter carrying up through the floorboards like smoke from a fire that burned too hot. Her father struggled to sit straighter. "Eliza, listen to me. The safe in my office combination's your mother's birthday. There's papers in there, old ones from when your grandfather built this place. If something happens to me..." "Father, you're not..." "I'm dying, child. Been dying since the fever took hold. Only questions how much time we got left." His hand found hers, stronger than she'd expected. "But dying don't mean defeated. Remember that." Footsteps on the stairs announced the end of the meeting below. Pike's boots, heavy and measured. Sutter's shoes, quick and light. And underneath, the soft sound of someone trying to move quiet. Jonah appeared in the doorway, his face grim. "They're coming up. Best you hear this from me first." Pike pushed past him without ceremony, Sutter trailing behind like a thin shadow. The overseer's smile had turned triumphant. "Good news, Mr. Halcombe. Got your debt situation sorted out." "How?" Eliza asked, though she dreaded the answer. Pike opened his ledger with a flourish. "Simple business. Asset liquidation. The troublesome property goes to Charleston next week. Should fetch enough to cover what's owed, plus interest." The words hit like a fist to the stomach. Eliza looked at Jonah, saw the resignation in his eyes, and felt something break apart inside her chest. "You can't," she whispered. "Can and will," Pike said. "Got the bank's backing and your father's signature. All legal and proper." He pulled a paper from his coat, official-looking, bearing a seal that caught the grey light from the window. Her father's signature sprawled across the bottom, shaky but recognizable. Mira stepped closer, her dark eyes fixed on the document. After a moment, she looked up at Eliza and gave the smallest shake of her head. "When?" Eliza asked. "Week's end," Sutter said, speaking for the first time. His voice held the flat tone of a man discussing livestock. "Market's good right now. Won't get better prices waiting." Pike folded the paper and slipped it back into his coat. "Course, there's still the matter of ensuring the property don't wander off before sale day. Might need to take some precautions." The threat hung in the air like smoke from a smothered fire. "You'll have your money," Eliza said, quietly. "Father's given his word. Word's a fine thing," Pike said, "but locks and chains are better." He tipped his hat and headed for the door, Sutter following like a faithful dog. At the threshold, Pike paused. "Miss Eliza, still stand by those courthouse words? About your standards?" Every eye in the room turned to her. Her father, weak against his pillows. Mira, with her blue ribbon and perfect memory. Jonah, who'd saved her father's life with nothing but patience and skill. And Pike, watching with the hunger of a man who'd already counted his profits. "I said what I said," she repeated, the words tasting like ash. "Good." Pike's smile showed all his teeth. "Wouldn't want folks thinking grief had muddled your judgment." The door closed behind them with a soft click that sounded like a cell door locking. Her father's head fell back against the pillows. "I'm sorry, child. Didn't have choice." Mira moved to the window, watching the black carriage roll away through puddles that reflected nothing but grey sky. "Song's not over yet," she said softly. "Got more verses to sing." But her voice held less certainty than before, and the ribbon at her wrist trembled like a flag in storm wind. Outside, the rain continued its patient drumming, washing the world clean for whatever came next. The storm broke in earnest that night, turning the creek to a torrent and the roads to rivers of mud. Eliza stood at her bedroom window, watching lightning fracture the darkness while thunder shook the house to its bones. Somewhere in that maze of wind and water, Pike's plans moved forward like a slow-grinding machine. Sleep was impossible. She paced her room until the floorboards knew her restless pattern, then gave up and ventured into the dark hallways. The house felt different at night older, full of shadows that remembered generations of Halcombe's sorrows. She found Mira in the kitchen, bent over her father's papers by candlelight. The child had spread documents across the scarred table, sorting them with the careful attention of a scholar. "Couldn't sleep either?" Eliza asked. Mira looked up, the blue ribbon at her wrist catching candlelight. "Looking for grandfather's will? The real one." "Real one?" Paper Pike showed today's signatures right, but the seal's wrong again. Same grape cluster, but the wax is fresh. "Your grandfather's will from 15 years ago wouldn't have new wax." Eliza sank into the chair beside her. The papers made a puzzle across the table: deeds and contracts, marriage certificates and birth records, the careful documentation of a family's history. Mira, if Pike's been forging documents, he has been, but proving it's different from knowing it. The child's finger traced a line of script on an old deed. Need the real papers, the ones with seals that match and ink that's faded proper. Father mentioned a safe, said there were old papers inside. Then, we need to look. Mira began gathering the documents with careful hands, before Pike decides looking's too dangerous to allow. A crash of thunder made them both jump. In the flash that followed, Eliza saw another figure in the kitchen doorway. Jonah stepped inside, water dripping from his coat. Roads are washing out. Bridge over Miller's Creek is gone, and the ferry's running high. Good for us, Mira said. Pike can't move anybody tonight, or get help if he needs it. Jonah shook water from his hair. But come morning, he'll be looking for ways to secure his investment. Eliza stood, decision crystallizing like frost on window glass. Then we look tonight. Father's safe, I know the combination. They moved through the sleeping house like ghosts, avoiding the floorboards that creaked and the stairs that groaned under weight. Her father's office smelled of tobacco and old leather, familiar scents that usually comforted, but tonight felt like elegies for a dying world. The safe sat behind her grandfather's portrait, its black iron face scarred with decades of use. Eliza's fingers found the combination her mother's birthday, worn smooth by years of her father's touch. Inside, papers yellow with age, bound in ribbons that had faded from red to dusty pink. Deeds and wills, contracts and letters, the accumulated weight of a family's business across generations. Mira's small hands moved through them with reverent care. Here, your grandfather's true will. The document felt different from Pike's version, paper thicker, ink browner, seal pressed deep into wax that had darkened with age. And there, in margins written so small they barely caught the candlelight, asterisk, upon faithful service and Christian character demonstrated, Jonah Freeman shall be granted full manumission and freedom, with compensation for years of loyal service. Asterisk, the words seemed to shimmer in the uncertain light. Freedom, written in her grandfather's careful script. Not sold south, not bound forever, but freed if the law would honor what love had written in secret places. Freeman, Eliza whispered. That's your true name? Jonah nodded. Grandfather knew it. Said names matter, even when they can't be spoken. Mira's finger traced the margin script. Look at the date, written 3 years before the official will. This came first. Why hide it in the margins? Maybe he couldn't say it plain, Jonah said quietly, but he couldn't leave it unsaid either. Thunder crashed overhead, and the candle flame wavered. Somewhere in the house, a door slammed in the wind, or not the wind. Pike, Eliza breathed. They froze, listening. Footsteps in the hall, moving slow and careful. A board creaked, then another. Someone was searching the house. Mira blew out the candle. Darkness swallowed them whole, thick as velvet. The footsteps paused, then changed direction, coming toward the office. Eliza's hands found the will, folding it small. Where to hide it? Her dress had no pockets deep enough, and Pike would search anything obvious. Mira's whisper was barely breath. Give it here. The child took the paper and worked it into some hidden fold of her dress. In the darkness, she seemed to disappear entirely, as if she'd learned to become shadow when shadows were needed. The office door opened, slow as spreading ink. I know you're in here. Pike's voice carried the patience of a hunter who could wait all night. Saw the candle from outside. A match flared, blooming into yellow light. Pike stood silhouetted in the doorway, his face half hidden by flame and shadow. Miss Eliza, out for a midnight stroll. Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd look over Father's papers. Thoughtful. His gaze moved around the office, noting the open safe, the scattered documents, the 3 figures caught like deer in torchlight. And you brought help? How? Thorough. He lit the lamp on her father's desk, filling the room with steady light. Find anything interesting? Old deeds, mostly. Nothing that would concern you. Pike's smile was all teeth and hunger. Oh, everything concerns me now, especially old deeds with special provisions. He knew. Of course he knew. Pike hadn't become overseer by missing details that mattered. Where is it? He asked conversationally. Where's what? Don't play games, Miss Eliza. The margin will. The one your grandfather hid like a love letter from a guilty conscience. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the storm's fury and the lamp's quiet hissing. "Doesn't matter," Pike said finally. "Come morning, I'll tear this place apart board by board if I have to, and if the will's gone missing, well, sometimes documents get lost in storms." Tragic, but not uncommon. He moved closer, his shadow falling across them like a threat. "But I'm not unreasonable. Hand it over now, and maybe I won't have to report certain irregularities to the authorities." Midnight meetings, stolen documents, runaway plots, serious charges, those, especially for young ladies with reputations to maintain. Eliza met his gaze without flinching. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Course you don't." Pike's hand moved toward his coat. "But maybe a night in the root cellar will improve your memory. All three of you. Give you time to think about cooperation versus consequences." Lightning split the sky outside, illuminating the office in stark white. In that frozen moment, Eliza saw Mira's small hand moving toward the lamp, saw Jonah tensing like a coiled spring, saw Pike's fingers closing on whatever weapon he carried. Thunder crashed, shaking the house, and in the darkness that followed the lightning, three shadows moved faster than thought. The lamp crashed to the floor, oil spreading like liquid fire across wooden boards. In the sudden darkness, everything became touch and sound and desperate motion. Pike's curses filled the air as he lunged toward where they'd been standing. But they were already moving, Mira diving beneath the desk, Jonah rolling toward the window, Eliza scrambling for the door. "Run!" Jonah's voice cut through Pike's shouting. They ran. Through the house, down corridors black as pitch, guided only by memory and desperation. Behind them, Pike's boots thundered pursuit, his voice promising consequences that would follow them beyond nightmares. The front door stuck, swollen with rain. Jonah's shoulder hit it like a battering ram, and it burst open to spill them into the storm. Rain struck like thrown pebbles, cold and sharp. Wind whipped Eliza's nightdress around her legs as they splashed across the muddy yard toward the barn. Lightning showed their path in frozen snapshots, the stable door hanging open, hay scattered like yellow snow, horses nickering nervous in their stalls. "This way," Mira called, her small form almost lost in the driving rain. She led them not toward the road, but through the back paddock toward the creek. The water ran high and fast, carrying branches and debris from upstream farms. What had been a gentle crossing that morning was now a torrent that would swallow anything caught in its grip. Pike's voice echoed from the house, calling for help that might or might not come. In this storm, with roads washed out and bridges gone, they were alone with their choices. "Can't cross here," Jonah said, shouting over the wind. "Don't need to cross," Mira called back. "Need to follow. Creek leads to the mill race. Mill race leads to safe ground." She was already moving, skirting the water's edge with the sure-footedness of someone who'd walked these paths in darkness before. Her blue ribbon streamed behind her like a signal flag, bright against the storm. They followed the creek's course through flooded pastures and drowned corn rows. The ground sucked at their feet, trying to trap them in mud that clung like cold molasses. Eliza's nightdress grew heavy with water and debris, but she kept moving, driven by something stronger than comfort or propriety. Behind them, lights bobbed in the distance. Pike with a lantern, perhaps others joining the hunt. The storm would slow them, but it wouldn't stop them forever. There, Mira pointed through the rain. The mill wheel loomed ahead, its paddles frozen by floodwater that ran too fast and high. The building beside it was dark, but something about its silhouette seemed different. A door standing open, perhaps, or a window lit by more than storm flash. They splashed across the mill's flooded yard, water reaching their knees. The current tugged at their legs, promising to sweep them away if they lost their footing. At the mill door, Mira paused. Her hand found a rope hanging beside the threshold, and she pulled it 3 times, 2 quick, 1 long. From inside came an answering pattern, different but harmonious. The door opened to reveal Mrs. Naylor, her grey hair loose around her shoulders and her eyes bright with urgency. "Wondered when you'd come," she said, stepping aside to let them enter. The mill's interior was warm and dry, lit by candles that cast dancing shadows on stone walls. Other figures moved in the half-light, men and women, whose faces Eliza didn't recognize, but whose presence felt solid as oak timber. "Pike's following," Jonah said. "Expected, Mrs." Naylor moved to a window, peering out at the storm. But storms have their uses. Hard to track people through rushing water. She turned to Mira. "Child, do you have what we need?" Mira nodded, her small hand moving to that secret fold in her dress. But before she could produce the will, shouts echoed from outside. Pike's voice, closer than before, calling for them to surrender what they'd stolen. "Back way, Mrs." Naylor said quickly. "Creek path's flooded, but the mill race still runs clear." They moved deeper into the building, through chambers where grain had been ground in better times. The mill race ran beneath their feet, its water channeled through stone guides that had been built to last centuries. At the rear of the mill, a wooden platform extended over the race. Mrs. Naylor lifted a trapdoor, revealing a small boat that rocked gently in the channeled current. "Holds 4, if you don't mind being friendly," she said. "Follows the race down to Miller's Landing, where friends are waiting." Pike's fist hammered on the mill's front door. His voice promised fire and law, and consequences for anyone who harbored thieves. "Go, Mrs." Naylor said. "I'll give him something to think about." They climbed into the boat, water slapping its sides like eager hands. Mira sat in front, her blue ribbon bright in the darkness. Jonah took the oars, his hands sure despite the uncertain light. Eliza looked back at Mrs. Naylor. "What will you tell him?" "The truth. That I'm a Quaker woman praying for flood victims." Her smile was sharp as winter steel. "He can interpret that however he likes." The boat slipped into the race, carried forward by current that knew its business. Behind them, the mill disappeared into storm and shadow, taking its secrets back into darkness. They rode the water through the night, guided by Mira's perfect memory and Jonah's steady hands. The mill race carried them past sleeping farmhouses and drowned bridges, through a countryside transformed by rain into something wild and new. At Miller's Landing, lantern light bloomed like a flower in the darkness. More friends, more faces willing to help for reasons they didn't need to explain. A wagon waited, its bed lined with quilts and its horses patient in the storm. "Bible's safe," Mira whispered as they climbed into the wagon. Her hand found Eliza's in the darkness. "Song remembers, even in floods." The wagon rolled into the night, wheels splashing through, puddles that reflected nothing but the promise of dawn still hours away. Morning came soft and silver, the storm's fury spent in grey light that turned the world gentle again. Eliza woke in Mrs. Naylor's parlor, wrapped in a quilt that smelled of lavender and wood smoke. Through lace curtains, she could see the creek running normal again, its banks scattered with debris that told the night's story in broken branches and muddy stones. Mira sat cross-legged on the floor nearby, the precious will spread before her like a map to promised land. In daylight, her grandfather's margin script seemed more substantial, not just hope scratched in hidden places, but law written small and sure. "Sleep well, Mrs.?" Naylor asked, entering with a tray of coffee that steamed promises of warmth. "Like the dead," Eliza admitted, accepting a cup gratefully. "Where's Jonah?" "Checking the roads. Storm washed out the bridge to town, but there's talk of the court sending a deputy out to investigate last night's disturbances. Pike. Of course, he wouldn't let the night's escape pass without consequences. By now he'd have crafted a story that painted them as thieves and himself as defender of proper order. Will anyone believe him?" Mrs. Naylor's smile held depths like still water. "Depends what we give them to believe instead." The door opened to admit Jonah, his clothes damp with morning mist. "Deputy's coming. Should be here within the hour." "Good," Mrs. Naylor said. "Gives us time to prepare our presentation." "Presentation?" The older woman moved to a cabinet, retrieving papers that rustled like autumn leaves. "Your grandfather's will isn't the only document that survived the flood. Amazing how storms can clarify certain legal situations." She spread the papers across the table beside Mira's will. Official documents, all of them court records, property deeds, witness testimonies bound in ribbons that spoke of careful preservation. "Mrs. Naylor," Eliza said slowly, "how long have you been collecting evidence?" "Since the day Pike arrived in this county. Man like that doesn't change his nature, just his location." Her finger traced a line of script on one document. "These show a pattern of forged seals, altered dates, signatures that don't quite match, been waiting for the right moment to present them. Mira looked up from the will. Moment's here now. Indeed it is. Mrs. Naylor moved to the window, watching the road. Deputy Thompson's a fair man, but he'll need solid proof. Accusations against a white overseer require more than suspicion. What kind of proof? The kind that comes from careful observation and perfect memory. Her gaze moved to Mira with something that might have been pride. Child, can you tell the deputy exactly what you saw in Pike's documents? The wrong ink, the reversed seal, the fresh wax on old paper? Mira nodded. Remember everything, even the way his hand shook when he showed the travel pass. And can you show him your grandfather's true will? Explain why its provisions should be honored? Yes, ma'am. Eliza felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen. Not hope exactly too dangerous to call it that, but possibility. The chance that truth might carry more weight than lies, that justice might remember its own name. Hoofbeats on the road announced the deputy's arrival. Through the window, Eliza saw a man in his middle years dismounting from a tired horse, his badge catching morning light. Deputy Thompson, Mrs. Naylor said, opening the door before he could knock. Thank you for coming so quickly. Mrs. Naylor. He touched his hat brim respectfully. Got word there was trouble at the Halcombe place last night. Pike says documents were stolen, property damaged. Documents were preserved, Mrs. Naylor corrected. Property was protected. As for trouble, well, that depends on how you define the word. She gestured him inside, where the papers waited on the table like evidence at a trial. Deputy Thompson's eyes moved over them, taking in the official seals and careful script. These look like court documents. They are. Records of transactions in this county over the past 3 years. All bearing seals that should match, signatures that should be consistent. Mrs. Naylor's voice held the patience of a teacher, explaining simple arithmetic. I think you'll find some interesting discrepancies. The deputy leaned closer, his weathered face creasing with concentration. After a moment, he looked up sharply. These seals, they're different. Same design, but one's reversed, Mira said quietly. Grape cluster hangs wrong way. And the wax is too fresh for a document from last winter. Deputy Thompson stared at the child, then back at the papers. How do you know about seal direction? Watch everything. Remember everything. Mira's blue ribbon caught morning light as she moved to another document. This one's got brown ink like it should, but this one's got blue. Clerk never uses blue for official papers. The deputy was quiet for a long moment, studying the evidence with growing alarm. If these are forgeries, then every transaction they support is void, Mrs. Naylor finished, including certain recent sales agreements. Eliza stepped forward. Deputy, my grandfather's will contains provisions that were never executed, provisions that would prevent the sale Pike's been planning. She nodded to Mira, who produced the real will with hands that barely trembled. Deputy Thompson read the margin script twice, his frown deepening. This changes things considerably, he said finally, but I'll need to verify these claims. Check the original seal records, compare handwriting samples. Of course, Mrs. Naylor's smile was serene as Sunday morning. The clerk keeps excellent records. I'm sure everything will bear scrutiny. Outside, another horse approached at speed. Through the window, they saw Pike riding hard, his face dark with storm clouds. Speak of the devil, Deputy Thompson muttered. Pike burst through the door without ceremony, his eyes wild with something that might have been panic. Deputy, thank God, these people are harboring stolen property. I demand you arrest them immediately. Mr. Pike, the deputy's voice held new coolness. I was just examining some interesting documents. Perhaps you could help me understand them. He held up one of the forged papers. Pike's face went white as church paint. Where did you? Preserved from last night's flood, Mrs. Naylor said mildly. Amazing how water can reveal hidden truths. Pike's hand moved toward his coat, then stopped as he noticed the deputy watching him carefully. I can explain those papers. I hope so, Deputy Thompson said, because if they're forgeries, we're looking at serious crimes. Fraud, theft, conspiracy. He let the words hang in the air like storm clouds. Federal charges, some of them. The room went quiet except for the sound of Pike's rapid breathing and the distant murmur of the creek running clear again after the night's rain. Mira stepped forward, her child's voice cutting through the silence like a bell. "Want to see how I know the seals are wrong?" Without waiting for permission, she moved to Mrs. Naylor's cabinet and retrieved a cloth bundle. Inside, wrapped like precious things, were brass seal dies, the actual stamps used to mark official documents. "Mrs. Naylor keeps them safe for the clerk when he travels," Mira explained. "Real grape cluster hangs down, like grapes do. False one points up, like somebody made it from memory instead of copying true." She pressed both dies into soft wax, side by side. The difference was unmistakable. One seal, natural and correct. The other a mirror image that betrayed its fraudulent origin. Pike made a sound like a trapped animal. His hand completed its journey to his coat, emerging with a small pistol that shook in his grip. "Nobody's going anywhere until I figure this out." Deputy Thompson's own weapon appeared with the speed of long practice. "Put it down, Pike. You're only making things worse." "Worse?" Pike's laugh held no humor. "I'm looking at prison or a noose. Don't see how it gets worse than that." The gun wavered between the deputy and the small group around the table. Pike's eyes held the desperate calculation of a man watching his world collapse in real time. "Could run," he said, as if trying to convince himself. "Got a fast horse? Know the back roads?" "Where would you go?" Mrs. Naylor asked gently. "And what would be the point? Truth travels faster than horses these days." Pike's weapon drooped as reality settled on his shoulders like a heavy coat. "They'll hang me." "Maybe," Deputy Thompson said carefully. "Or maybe they'll consider cooperation. Help us understand who else was involved, how long this has been going on." "Wasn't my idea," Pike said suddenly. "Sutter at the bank, he needed certain debts to be collectible. Easier to forge papers than wait for legal processes." The confession spilled out like water from a broken dam. Names and dates, forged documents and fraudulent sales. A conspiracy that reached beyond one plantation to touch businesses throughout the county. When Pike finally fell silent, Deputy Thompson secured his weapon and began writing in a leather-bound notebook. "This will require a full investigation," he said. "Court hearings, document verification, witness testimony." His gaze moved to Mira. "Including testimony from someone with a remarkable memory for details." "Will they listen to her?" Eliza asked. "In court, I mean. Will her word count for anything?" The deputy's smile was small but genuine. "When the evidence is this clear, when the physical proof supports every claim she makes, I think they'll listen very carefully indeed." He closed the notebook and looked around the room. "Mrs. Naylor, I'll need to take custody of these documents for evidence. Miss Halcombe, you'll want to get that will to the probate court immediately should void any pending sales." Pike sat, slumped in a chair, defeat written in every line of his body. "What happens to me? That's for a judge to decide. But cooperation tends to be viewed favorably." Deputy Thompson moved toward the door. "For now, you'll be coming with me. Got a nice cell in town where you can think about your choices." As the deputy led Pike away, the room seemed to exhale collectively. Eliza sank into a chair, suddenly aware of how exhausted she felt. "Is it over?" she asked. Mrs. Naylor began gathering the precious documents. "The legal part's just beginning. But the hardest part, the part that required courage, that's done." Mira moved to the window, watching the deputy's wagon disappear down the road. "Song's not finished yet," she said softly. "Got one more verse to sing." Jonah, who had been silent through most of the morning's drama, finally spoke. "What happens now? With the will, I mean." Eliza looked at him, really looked, taking in the quiet dignity that had never wavered, not even when facing sale and separation. "Now we honor what my grandfather wrote, what he meant to do but never got the chance to finish." She stood, smoothing her borrowed dress. "Mr. Freeman, I believe you have an appointment with Freedom." The courthouse steps blazed white in the afternoon sun, their familiar stones worn smooth by generations of feet seeking justice. A crowd had gathered despite the short-notice word, traveled fast in a county where not much happened and everything mattered. Eliza stood at the top of the steps, the original will in her hands, and Deputy Thompson beside her with his ledger of evidence. Below, faces turned up like flowers seeking light, townspeople curious about the morning's drama, farmers who'd left their fields to witness something that might change how business was done. At the back of the crowd, she spotted Burke Whitfield, his face dark, with something that might have been embarrassment or anger. Near the front, Doctor. Keene stood with her father, who'd insisted on being carried from his sickbed in a chair that shook with his breathing but couldn't shake his determination to see justice done. "Ladies and gentlemen," Deputy Thompson called, his voice carrying over the murmur of conversation, "we're here to address certain irregularities in recent legal proceedings and to honor provisions in the will of the late Samuel Halcombe that were never properly executed." He held up one of the forged documents alongside its genuine counterpart. "Physical evidence shows deliberate fraud in multiple transactions over the past 3 years. The county clerk's office will be conducting a full review, and any sales based on fraudulent papers will be voided immediately." A ripple of conversation moved through the crowd. Near the edge, Eliza saw Sutter the bankman shift nervously, his calculating eyes now holding the look of a man who'd wagered everything on the wrong horse. "Furthermore," the deputy continued, "the original will of Samuel Halcombe contains specific manumission provisions for one Jonah Freeman to be granted upon demonstration of faithful service and Christian character." Jonah stepped forward from where he'd been standing, with Mrs. Naylor. His movement was measured, dignified, showing none of the fear that might have been expected from a man whose fate hung on the words of white strangers. "Jonah Freeman," Deputy Thompson said formally, "approach the bench." There was no bench, of course just courthouse steps and afternoon sunlight, and the weight of tradition that made the moment feel as official as any courtroom proceeding. Jonah climbed the steps slowly, his eyes meeting Eliza's as he passed. In that look, she saw not gratitude, he was too proud for that, but acknowledgement. Recognition of something shared that went beyond the morning's legal drama. Deputy Thompson opened the will, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. "By provision of Samuel Halcombe, written in his own hand and sealed with his official mark. Upon faithful service and Christian character demonstrated, Jonah Freeman shall be granted full manumission and freedom, with compensation for years of loyal service and protection under law, as any free man enjoys." The deputy looked up from the document. "Do you, Jonah Freeman, accept this grant of freedom with all its rights and responsibilities?" Jonah's voice was steady as stone foundations. "I do. Then, by the authority vested in me by the county court and by witness of this community, I declare you a free man, with all rights thereof." The deputy pressed his official seal into warm wax, the sound echoing like a bell finding true pitch. When he lifted the die, the grape cluster seal showed perfect in the afternoon light, hanging down as grapes should, honest and clear. Silence stretched for a moment, broken only by the sound of the wind stirring dust around the courthouse steps. Then Mira began to sing. Her voice rose clear and sweet, carrying the old hymn that had started everything, "Low River, carry me quiet." But now the words seemed different, not directions for escape but celebration of arrival. One by one, other voices joined her. Mrs. Naylor's alto, rich with years of singing in dark places, Dr. Keene's uncertain tenor, even her father's wheeze, carrying what melody his damaged lungs could manage. The hymn swelled through the crowd, pulling in voices that had never sung together before. Blacksmith and banker's wife, farmer and preacher, binding themselves together with melody that made the courthouse steps feel like church ground. When the last note faded, Deputy Thompson stepped forward again. "There's one more matter to address." He looked toward the back of the crowd. "Mr. Sutter, I believe you have some explaining to do about certain banking practices." But Sutter was gone, his space in the crowd empty as a pulled tooth. Fled, most likely, before the consequences of his cooperation with Pike could catch up with him. "We'll find him," the deputy said grimly. "Justice has a long memory in this county." As the crowd began to disperse, Eliza found herself face to face with Jonah on the courthouse steps. Around them, people moved with the satisfied energy that comes after witnessing something significant, history made visible in afternoon sunlight. "What will you do now?" she asked. His smile was small but real, same as always. "Care for horses, help where I'm needed. Only difference is now I get paid for it. And if you choose to leave, you're free to go anywhere. Free to stay, too. Sometimes that's the more important choice." Mira appeared at their side, her blue ribbon bright in the sun. "Preacher, Josiah wants to know if you'll help with the school. Teaching children to read, maybe showing them about horses and such." Jonah looked down at the child who'd saved them all, with her perfect memory and fearless heart. I'd be honored. The afternoon was fading toward evening when they finally left the courthouse steps. Eliza walked beside Jonah and Mira, their shadows stretching long behind them as they headed toward home, or what home might become in this new world they'd witnessed into being. At the edge of town, Mrs. Naylor waited in her wagon. "Room for passengers," she called. "Got a blessing to attend." They climbed into the wagon bed, settling among quilts that smelled of lavender and hope. As they rolled through the countryside toward home, Mira began another song, not the escape hymn this time, but something newer, something that spoke of foundations laid and futures built on solid ground. The plantation came into view as the sun touched the western hills, its white columns catching the last light like promises kept. On the front porch, lanterns had been lit despite the remaining daylight, their flames steady in the still air. Her father sat in his chair on the gallery, wrapped in quilts but smiling. Aunt Liddy bustled around him with the determined care of someone who'd decided death could wait its turn. "There's something else," Eliza said as the wagon stopped. "Something that needs saying." She climbed down and turned to face the small crowd that had followed them from town. Neighbors and workers, family and friends, all drawn together by the day's events. "This plantation has been built on certain assumptions," she began, her voice carrying in the evening air. "About who has value, who has rights, who deserves freedom and dignity and fair wages for honest work." She pulled a folded paper from her dress, the household charter she'd begun writing the night before, its ink still wet with possibility. "As of today, those assumptions change. Anyone who works this land will be paid fair wages. Children will have schooling available if they want it. No one will be sold, separated from family, or treated as property." She looked directly at Jonah. "This includes you, Mr. Freeman. If you choose to stay, you'll be stable master with full pay and authority. If you choose to go, you'll have letters of recommendation and travel money to start fresh wherever you please. And if I choose to stay for reasons that go beyond business?" The question hung in the evening air like smoke from the lanterns. Around them, the small crowd held its breath. Eliza felt heat rise in her cheeks, but her voice stayed steady. "Then we'll see where that leads us. Together," she thought, of her courthouse words. I'd never date a slave, and how hollow they sounded now. How small and fearful and wrong. "I said something foolish yesterday," she continued, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Something cruel and ignorant. I can't take back those words, but I can learn from them, can try to become someone worthy of the patience you've shown me." Jonah's smile was small but warm. "We all say foolish things sometimes. Question is what we do after." "Preacher," Josiah stepped forward from the gathered crowd. "Seems like this might be a good time for a blessing. If folks are agreeable." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the group. Someone brought chairs from the house, others spread quilts on the gallery boards. As twilight deepened around them, they settled into an impromptu congregation, with the porch as their church and the lantern light as their altar candles. "Lord," the preacher began, his voice carrying over the quiet evening, "we've seen your mercy at work today. Seen truth triumph over lies, justice overcome greed, and hearts change in ways that only you can accomplish." Mira's voice rose in soft harmony, the blue ribbon at her wrist catching lantern light as she found the melody that would carry them all forward. "Bless this household as it begins again." "Preacher," Josiah continued, "bless the work of these hands, the choices of these hearts, and the future they'll build together." The hymn swelled around his words, voices joining one by one until the porch rang with harmony. Dogs lying at the edge of the light lifted their ears but stayed peaceful, as if even they recognized the sacred nature of what was happening. When the singing ended, full darkness had settled around them like a comfortable quilt. Stars began to appear overhead, distant but steady, promising that some lights never failed. People began to drift away, some to their own homes, others to quarters that would soon be transformed into something closer to real homes with real choices. Deputy Thompson shook hands all around before riding back to town with his prisoner and his evidence. Finally, only the household remained on the lantern-lit porch. Eliza sat beside her father's chair, Jonah nearby with Mira curled sleepy against his shoulder. Mrs. Naylor rocked gently in a borrowed chair, her weathered hands busy with some bit of mending that would wait for better light. "Proud of you, child," her father wheezed, his hand finding hers in the lamplight. Your grandfather would be proud too. Finally finished what he started. Eliza squeezed his fingers, feeling their fragility but also their warmth. It's just the beginning, Father. We've got years of work ahead, changing how things are done. Good work, though. Work worth doing. A comfortable silence settled over the porch, broken only by the soft sounds of evening, crickets tuning their instruments, the distant lowing of cattle, the gentle creak of wood, settling as the day's heat faded. Mira stirred against Jonah's shoulder. "Song's finished now," she murmured, more asleep than awake. "All the verses sung." "This verse," Jonah corrected gently. "Still got plenty more music to make." The lanterns burned steady in the still air, their light pushing back against darkness that no longer seemed threatening, but simply part of the natural rhythm of days ending and beginning. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolled the evening hour, its bronze voice carrying across fields where cotton grew and children would soon learn letters that would open worlds beyond anyone's imagining.